Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren Moon. I'm here with Don Garman. It's Tuesday, March 15th. We just got out of another one of our weekly investment committee meetings. Today, we had some discussions about what the right positioning is for this current environment, as we do every week, but we dug a little bit more into kind of the historical context for where we are, looked at our positioning over the past couple years, and Don has some kind of takeaways and thoughts we thought we would share with you all.
Great, thanks, Lauren. So yeah, I would first start out by saying, I'm not being glib. There's no sugarcoating it. It's just been a very, very, very savage market, and we recognize that. And so, the challenging position is, we all know cash yield zero. The Fed will take it to 25 basis points tomorrow, which is almost nearly guaranteed, and start a series of rate hikes, which may take us to the lofty levels of 1%. So if maybe your cash will yield 1% and then, within a year, we all agree that inflation will certainly exceed that amount. Now we have bonds going down. Treasuries, which we do not own, have gone down more than investment grade, which we do own, which have gone down more than high yield, which we do own. So that has been a troubling new theme, which
it's usually the opposite, right?
Usually always the opposite. Yeah. So now kind of like the Fed is at the end of the line in terms of where, what their options are. Now they have to raise into a slowing economy, which is creating all this massive tension. Kind of we have to unwind all the stimulus, right? And we've been talking in these videos about medicine to the patient, lurching on the table, and all these different metaphors, but it's sort of, that's what and then we're adding global geopolitical tension and uncertainty around that. And it's created a fear, tsunami, and that's manifesting itself in a lot of different ways. One of the things we looked at is the combination of 10-year treasury notes, and the QQQ is down 16.9% from the first of the year, which has never happened before. So it's sort of like this really odd, mixture, which leads a lot of people to say, get me out of the way, get me out, in some, in a million different ways of saying that. So we look at, which I guess is, if cash is the alternative, known loser. If bonds is the other alternative, in some sense, down as painfully as certain types of equities. Certainly the long view was down much less than either of those. So we started to look at what's the historical, analog for where we are. Well, this is interesting, and this is not, it's not exciting to report this, but it's factual. We looked at 15 experiences in the past where does this rank in terms of severity? The market has had 48 trading days so far this year. This is the 49th. This is the fourth worst start in the equity markets ever. So, well, boy, isn't that the signal to get out? Well, no, because if you look at the 15 examples of this type of start, 14 of them ended better than this moment in the first 48 trading days of the year. 13 of them ended up on the year. And in only one instance, 2008, was the market down from this point forward. So I mentioned this is the fourth worst start. We don't know where it's going to finish, but multiple examples. And Daniel, I think, will put up this slide. This really would mark similar to the end of it. However, we did adjust positioning slightly downward in equity, and most of you are familiar with the mechanism we use to do that, what I've called turning down the volume on the portfolio. And we do that at this moment, even though this is hardly early or some bold call on, getting out of the markets, but because we want to be better positioned for worse getting less bad. And we're not at all convinced that we're not still going worse still. And I say that, and I've talked about this in videos over the years. We try to follow earnings and the direction of earnings estimates. And still we are becoming more convinced that earnings estimates are still way too high and have further fall to further to come down. And so we turn down the volume. We've done it across strategies now at this point, and we'll be content. If there's a couple of nice days, if this is one of them, who knows, after we said that last week, the market turned, who knows where we are, but we want to have a lower volume, emanating from the assets and the strategies. So we have taken that maneuver today, but I would say humbly that the storm, the eye of the storm is either near or past. So that is, I think that sets us up for, I don't want to say a V recovery. I don't think one's coming, but I think all we need to do well or perform is for not everything to be falling at once, which is kind of the environment that we found ourselves in.
Yep.
So I don't know if that helps, but I figured we would share some of that discussion that we had and kind of let you know why we are firmly in the camp that, and I used this earlier, so I'll share it, which is, the long view strategy is an ocean liner. I know I usually use the airplane metaphor, but we're going to call it an ocean liner assemblage of assets. There are the best, some combination of the best and the biggest balance sheet companies in the world in that strategy. And so that strategy is in the midst of a really severe storm far out to sea. But we are making a journey, and a journey that will take time, and not days or weeks or months, but years. And so we see the first signs of people jumping overboard and swimming for it, or lowering dinghies and climbing in. And I would rather press through a storm in an ocean liner or a tanker than I would in a dinghy. And when I say a dinghy, what I mean is people that are selecting, single shot asset cash, which requires you to get back in. It's a two-way trade, and to buy it all back more expensive is terrible. It's a bad idea. Or if you're going to buy it back all cheaper, then by definition, you're going to call when things are even worse and say, buy it all back. Unlikely. We don't see people do that successfully very often. So I just would say, we understand this is brutal and it's uncomfortable. It is for us as well. But what we can control is the amplitude of the moves. And so we have taken additional steps to lower the amplitude for the time being, and feel like, there will be a time that we reverse this. And, if today was the bottom and things continue to get better, we will start to see signs of that in stability and, less bad news and breakthroughs and talks and ceasefires and lowering inflation numbers. And then the backdrop is we will have plenty of paths forward, to generate good returns from that position. And so we just get a little less long when uncertainty is this high.
Yep.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Lauren, or anything that I could have said better? Sure, there's
No.
everything.
I think you gave a great recap of our conversation. I think there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and that it's easy or normal even to become kind of fearful, not knowing what's going to come next. And so it's helpful looking at those like kind of just historical norms of when other years have started out like this, how have they ended up, as a reminder why to not jump ship. So
yeah, and as much as we think we know, there's been plenty of bad years and bad setups and bad news, and that stuff tends to get priced in, but we don't know that that's what's happened. But we know that the quality of the assets that we hold are the answer, and
right.
So then it's just a question of time horizon.
Yep.
So what we have heard that people are really enjoying the more regular check-ins. So we've committed to doing these on a regular basis, probably weekly, until, you know, everybody gets sick of us, which would be about the time when things are starting to get a little bit better. And we will look forward to that day more than you, or as much as you, for sure. And let's not forget, we own it all too. So this is all, you know, it's not some academic exercise for us. This is all being experienced on the P&L in our own family's accounts also.
Yep.
So it's no fun. So on that note, we will leave it there, and
Right.
we will check in next week. And as always, you guys have been so nice in reaching out. I can't say that enough. You don't need to think about us in our mental health as much as you clearly do, but we're all doing fine. We take good care of each other. And, you know, we're not ER physicians. We're not highway patrolmen. We're not firefighters. You know, this is important work that we want to do for decades, but, you know, we take care of each other, and we make sure that we get plenty of good sleep and exercise, and try to handle all those things we can control. So we'll leave it at that, but thank you for your concern. And on that note, we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.